So here we're back for season 2 of Device and Conquer. And so thank you for watching season 1 enough to show up for this next season we've got coming up. So in this, we get a little bit more back to the basics and talk about some of the concepts and principles kind of underlying the overall process that we talked about last time, where we introduced you to what is the FDA, what is the European Union Commission, and those things. So now we're going to kind of dig a little deeper into vernacular in this episode.
Yep. In this season, it's really like Michelle was saying, it's all about the how to. It's practical, tactical. Pull up your sleeves. Let's actually learn how to do some of this work instead of sit in that nebulous phase that you get in.
Mhm.
So, um,
First, we've got to learn how to speak FDA. You may think because you read English and you speak English that you can read and understand what the regulations say and then have a conversation with FDA about it. And I hate to disabuse you of that notion, but that is not how it works. FDA has its own dialect of English, if you will, to the point that on my LinkedIn profile, I have make a joke about other languages spoken, and I have FDA down there. And so
it's definitely its own dialect. Michelle, what are some of the magic words or phrases that FDA uses that kind of mean something totally different than you would think in your everyday vernacular?
should,
Yep.
like the rest of us probably don't think that that's a
Com
absolute have to. And then people said, well, they should have said shall if it was like required. I'm like, nah, that's should mean shall, basically. They will tell you it's a suggestion or it's not a requirement, or another one, non-binding.
Yep, non-binding is the
Similar
one
as
that I think
should.
of.
What should and non-binding mean is that you have to come up with ways to do it that are at least as good as what they required, and if not better, if not a higher standard.
Yep.
Um,
And areas that you really see those are in guidance documents, right?
mhm.
So guidance documents are the foundations of how to do regulatory. And where I see a lot of newbies in this space get strung up, or, they don't know how to argue with their bosses because the guidance document will say, this is non-binding recommendations from the FDA. And so they think that it's just as it implies a guidance. What FDA really means is exactly what Michelle was saying. You better have a better solution, a more rigorous solution to what FDA has agreed on in that guidance document, or demonstrated that it really isn't applicable to your technology. And you have to demonstrate that early on, usually with a pre-sub.
You better know what that guidance document says, even if you don't do it,
Yep.
because you don't think it's applicable, but you need to be able to speak, articulate, and justify every section in there, because FDA will go through a guidance document line by line, ask those questions or ask for that evidence. And then because they expect a dialogue around it, because they're, again, guidance documents are, or is the FDA telling industry what the FDA's current thinking is on a
Yep.
topic. So,
And what about like substantial equivalence? Because that seems straightforward on the surface, but
mhm,
it actually means a whole big thing to
right,
FDA. So
right.
substantial equivalence, you might think, okay, well, it does the same thing. But that's not really what FDA is looking at. When you read it preliminarily, you're like, okay, does that mean it's the same thing? It does the same function. I guess they're equivalent, but
Yeah.
it's so much deeper.
The very first thing that you have to think about when you hear the term substantial equivalence is intended use.
Mhm.
And then the second thing that you have to think about is technology features.
Yes.
And you have to make an argument across that all that spectrum of requirements between intended use and product features about how your product is substantially equivalent to the predicate or the comparator device that you want to use.
Yeah, and that's where
Mm.
I think people get tripped up is because they think about the first one, well, okay, our intended use is the same, but then they don't think about the second part. Do your technological features match? Because that matters when you use the term substantially equivalent to
It,
FDA.
it
It
means it does
ha-
not raise new questions of safety or efficacy.
Yep,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah. Um, So, and then even in, we'll get into this a little bit more deeper in a subsequent episode, but even in substantial equivalence, you've got this subset of having to prove intended use and technological characteristics and make a statement about safety and efficacy. But the way you do that is you build an argument around the terms same, similar, different.
Yeah.
So that's like tier three of a good predicate strategy.
And this is all language you should be noting, by the way. If
Okay.
you're listening and you're new to this, same, similar, different, those mean different things, and they mean something specific to FDA when you're doing a submission. And we'll talk about it later, like Michelle said, in another podcast episode. We'll do a whole dedicated one on substantial equivalence because it's more than those two words. It deserves its own episode. I kind of want to pivot a little bit. What about claims? This is the other area I think people get super tripped up on because there's a lot of magic language that happens in regulatory that keeps you kind of in your lane, and then it seems like you do your commercialization and it's a constant battle to be novel and enticing and sexy on the market versus substantially
Yeah.
equivalent and exactly like everyone else. So I
Yeah. It's
think
a trip because, everybody wants to be, especially with a new device, new technology, they want to make all these claims about how different they are. But then you have to turn around and tell FDA how similar you are at the same time. So this is a real tightrope for um, companies to walk because that can kick you, saying the wrong thing in your claims can kick you from being considered a class two eligible for a 510K, which is a simpler path, into a de novo, which means up
yeah.
new, which is meant for novel, moderate risk technologies.
And the biggest offender right now are people using the word AI in their description of product. So AI is now, this will be a little bit of my soapbox. It is a huge hot topic for FDA because it means true AI for FDA, and that requires predetermined change control plans, that requires very, very intensive algorithms and validations for all of your algorithms that requires ongoing involvement for FDA. I mean, it's such a big deal that FDA has its own published list of devices that contain AI. But now, because we work with so many startups, I meet with so many people that say, hey, my device has AI. And when I ask the question, it is actually not AI. What they're saying is that they are intending to go with one type of algorithm for the initial launch, get more data, revise that, and then push out a new patch of information to update
Mhm.
the algorithm. That's not AI.
So
And
let's
so,
let's put these in context because we're hearing AI, we're hearing claims pushing you out of things. Let's talk about areas where that's rampant, and that's general wellness. What is the concept of involved with general wellness?
yep. So general wellness is kind of a classification of medical devices that FDA has determined is under enforcement discretion. I know that was a long phrase, but what that really means is that FDA isn't going to review those technologies because they've determined that they're low risk. And they're intended for kind of living well with a kind of disease statement that and living well is another word that matters. You cannot diagnose, you cannot treat, you cannot
Means
do
these people already know that they have a health condition that to live well with.
right. Or it's just for, kind of very general things. And the very first thing that kind of came out under this was like the Fitbit with, just your step tracker, because you want to have a step tracker to kind of track your exercise. Um, My Fitness Pal, where you're kind of tracking your calories and your nutrition, like all of this kind of goes under that wellness category. Um, some very early sleep trackers. But then what ended up happening with those devices is they started adding more and more claims. Now all of a sudden you have a heart rate, and then you have a cardiac monitor. And now there's blood pressure, which is a hilarious, and there's a deep dive that Michelle and I won't get into on this. But what happened was that these devices started very simple, track your steps. And then we added a heart rate, and that kind of got by. But then we added cardiac monitoring, and all of a sudden, FDA said, whoa, 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 whoa. This is a real medical indication. You need to submit your de novo Apple Watch. And they did.
And to take it even a step further, there was this company, Owlet Sock, or I believe that was the name of it, where they took that cardiac monitor and then put it in a baby sock and then gave it to parents and told them it was a general wellness device for them to just be able to just watch their baby's heart rate.
Yeah.
Except for then it started telling them, you might want to check on your baby because it is bradycardia right now. But
Yep. And they also got issued a warning letter and have since put in their de novo and their 510Ks afterwards to kind of do the regulatory right, correct path forward. And so AI, wearables is a really big market right now. That's what investors want to be investing in, and they want, and you have to kind of get the feedback early. But to FDA, they're almost trigger words. If they see AI in your submission, the level of scrutiny goes from here all the way to the top of the
or
seat.
on your website, because FDA does troll the internet and
Yep.
looks at devices that are out there as general wellness, particularly, and saying, are these claims consistent with
Yeah.
what the true intent for a general wellness? And FDA a lot of times says no, because you can't have. So this is getting, we digress. We are digressing. Take it back up to a level of a concept of a term that they need to know. And that now is inherent use. And you're
Yeah.
not going to find the FDA define inherent use anywhere. You will read it in warning letters to companies that have exceeded all of these that we're talking about. And now they're in trouble with the FDA because the FDA said that the implied inherent use counted as a new, like,
As a claim.
right.
Claim that you're making about your device. And so intended use is the big umbrella, right? It's what you say your device is intended for. Indications for use is kind of a little subsection of that. That's very specific. It's the who, the where, the why kind of categorization information. This inherent use is really kind of about technological features of your product that you might build in and then say, well, we didn't make any claims about it, but FDA assumes that the general public will use
Mhm.
it for
They
that
will.
purpose.
Yeah, if you say
Um,
you monitor blood pressure, they will make decisions about their blood pressure and if they are safe or if they're healthy or if they're having an event
yep. And so
based off of that device. And so that's inherent use.
other inherent uses that I've seen are people who add filters but don't make any claims about them. So they're just like, well, we know that there's particulate filtration in my device because I put
Mhm.
filters in it, but I'm not going for that indication because it's
Antimicrobial.
really burdensome.
Mhm.
But FDA says no. If your product has soy, they have concerns about, estrogen impacts and things like that. So a lot of times we see that with people who have like wound dressings and they want to include like some sort of soy or natural path that's more on like the cosmetics. I've seen things with silver coatings where FDA says, hey, you're trying to say this is antimicrobial, even though your claims don't say that. So it's really challenging when you're entering this industry, because your marketing and what your engineers say, it sounds totally foreign to what FDA is going to tell you, right? The way that FDA is going to tell you this is a problem is they're going to be like, hey, your device is misbranded. Here's a warning letter.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, well, we didn't misbrand it. We didn't say any of those claims. But FDA is going to say, well, the technology is there, so it's implied. And we think that you're doing like an inherent use scenario. So
Mm-hmm.
it gets a little bit challenging uh, to
So,
learn how to speak FDA back so that you're talking the same
mm-hmm.
conversation. That's the
Mm-hmm.
really important part.
Yep. So is there any other last things we need? I'm sure we've got a ton of alphabet soup. We could have, conversations about this for, probably an entire season of episodes about the vernacular. But we've got a few minutes left here. What are some other of these kind of high profile or most common terms that the new person or lay person would hear the FDA say that they might make assumptions that they know what the FDA is talking about or what they expect?
I think the other one that we didn't address is draft guidances, and I'm using quote marks here for those of you who are actually watching. A lot of times, a guidance document will get published as draft, and it is hard to get people to buy in on something that they consider draft. But as a new person, you should know that that is the latest and current thinking of FDA. And even though it is considered a draft from FDA, they are holding submissions accountable to it. And so that's a really conflicting message, because why don't they just publish it as final? I don't know, but they don't. And they publish it as a draft. And then a draft will stay active for 6, 7, 8 years as a draft. And it will be, in fact, you're going to be held accountable to it. So don't let,
And so these conversations sometimes come down to, are you willing to climb and die on that hill?
yes.
And then a lot of times you're climbing up a hill with an argument of FDA just because your engineering team says, well, it doesn't say that. You just tell the FDA that that's it optional and it's not a requirement. And I'm like, okay, the FDA just gave you a finding that your submission is not acceptable. And your response is, it is too. Like, that's not, you need to understand where their expectation is coming from and be able to give them a logical, rational answer. So I
I
think the other thing, I'm sorry, I wanted to just get in on this particular episode is punctuation. And so I have had engineering teams fight me tooth and nail over, no, they put the comma here. So then that means that this part is modifying the other sentence. And so that's what you say that they want is not what they want, because the punctuation, like, it modifies. All of a sudden, everybody remembers they're having to map a sentence structure in high school in English class, where it matters where words are and what they are modifying to it says different things,
Yep.
like, I'm done, I need to drink, or I'm done drinking. I'm As opposed to, I'm done, period, I'm drinking. Like,
Yeah. I mean,
I'm done, period, drinking, or I'm done, comma, or I'm done drinking. But me and Ty aren't, because we're going to be here next episode with our cocktails ready to go, ready to support you in your time of need, anger, denial, bargaining, wherever you're at in that cycle.
I think the other last one that I wanted to kind of put out there is process, because FDA will use the word process and mean procedure. They want to see a procedure for how you do that. Or if it's like process validation, they want to see a very specific suite of documentation, usually called the IQ, OQ, PQ, which, have fun with that. That's a whole other conversation.
That
Process
is like a level 301 vernacular right now. Like,
vernacular.
yeah, we'll talk about that
But that's
very
the thing.
much later.
that is something that happens is they'll say, okay, here's a process, and process means procedure, or does it mean like process validation, which means this whole suite of documentation? So context matters with FDA is what
Mhm.
I'm going to get to. Before we go, I think let's talk about some tips for speaking FDA. What is a good tip? I think a really good tip is that if FDA writes to you and you get some sort of interaction or feedback, mirror their language back to them. And also directly reference guidance documents when you can to kind of address whatever questions or concerns that they have. Those are two really good tips for learning how to speak FDA. And now, until next time, let's cheers our cocktails. And remember, we're all just trying to speak English here.
You know what we forgot to define? RAQA. I
Uh,
always tell people like lead calls when they're like, is it lean RACA? Is it lean RAQA? I said, it means if you don't know that RAQA stands for Regulatory Affairs and Quality Assurance, you need me. Like you can't be in the medical product space and not know what that means.
yeah, if you're seeing lean raka
Yeah,
instead
yeah,
of lean RAQA,
yeah.
uh,
And now we're really done, I think, with this episode.
yeah, we're done.